So that other side of the 1920s, we talked about that retrenchment in society and the roaring 20s. So now I'm going to talk to you about the roaring 20s, that kind of fun side that we often see portrayed in movies and Halloween costumes and that kind of thing. One of the things to keep in mind that made the roaring 20s possible was we were going, as a nation, going through this second industrial revolution. Right, a second industrial revolution. We have new ideas and new technologies. You have a government that's very pro-business. The Secretary of the Treasury at the time was Andrew Mellon, who pushed for and got a 50% reduction in the corporate taxes on corporate profits, personal incomes of business people, inheritance taxes were all cut. And this the idea was that they would then put the money into business. You also have new ideas about business and new technology. The assembly line. The assembly line is going to make things cheaper. It's going to make it easier for businesses to do things. They're going to have fewer wages that they have to pay. Think about if you have one cobbler making shoes, right? And they spend all day making a shoe, and they're very skilled laborers and working on this thing. And then you, instead of having one very skilled laborer, you break that down into all the different pieces, where one person's job is to cut out the bottom of the shoe all day, every day. One person's job is to cut out the sides. One person's job is to sew the sides to the bottom. One person's job is to lace the shoe, right? I mean, you break it down into an assembly line where each piece can continue, and those laborers are easier to replace. Okay. You also have things like shortened work weeks. People like Henry Ford, who is a very complicated individual who is great for the American economy, but is very anti-Semitic and liked Hitler and that kind of thing. He lowers wages and raises wages, lowers the number of hours in a work week, offers paid vacations, different things like this. So it's a complicated time. But that assembly line is going to make things cheaper. And as the price of things lowers and the technology changes, you have this new wave of American consumerism in the United States. So this new wave of American consumerism, and we're going to talk about consumerism and what it does to the economy in the 1950s as well when we get there. But the key to this word, of course, is consumer. And the key to that, of course, is consume. This idea of people buying things, people consuming things. People go crazy spending money in the 1920s. Things are cheaper because of the assembly line. Their prices are down. Supply is up. People are buying new technology because we've got electricity into these urban areas. So all that urbanization that we talked about in earlier lectures, now that's making a difference because you can electrify a city easier than you can electrify 100 farms all spread out. So if you have electricity, then you can get an iron. Then you can get a blender, then you can get a toaster, then you can get lights, you can get all these different things and have the opportunity to buy them. So that assembly line makes a huge, huge difference in what people are able to buy. It also makes a difference in the beginning of credit in this time period, where up to this point in American history, if you wanted to buy something, you had to pay cash, unless it was your house. Sometimes your house you could get on credit. But in the 1920s, you have the first credit cards. You have the first buying things on credit. So you could buy a toaster on credit, which means that maybe you don't really need a toaster, right? Nobody really needs a toaster, right? You can toast your bread in the oven. You don't need a toaster, but boy, it's nice to have a toaster, right? You put your toast in, that's quick and nice, and you have toast. And in the 1920s, people were buying toasters on credit. You know, those little things. Instead of a car or instead of a house, they were buying toasters on credit. And then you have this advertising that starts in the 1920s, mass advertising that we had never seen before. You have new materials like magazines, national magazines that are going to have these national advertisements. And you've got radio, which becomes so popular in this time period, which is going to have national advertisements. It's going to grow even more in the 30s. But these big advertisements of saying, well, you don't want, you know, this little 2-slice toaster, do you? You need a 4-slice toaster. And that whole idea of kind of keeping up with the Joneses, right? Well, my neighbor has a 4-slice toaster and I'm just stuck here with this dinky little 2-slice toaster. Well, I want to go buy that 4-slice toaster, and I don't really need it. I don't really have the money for it, but I really want it. So I'm going to use my credit here at the store and borrow money to get my 4-slice toaster. And look at my nice, look, that's a nice 4-slice toaster, right? And that kind of attitude about money and about those 4-slice toasters, those things that they didn't need. Nobody needs a 4-slice toaster. Even if you kind of need a 2-slice toaster, nobody needs a 4-slice toaster. You just need to do 2 slices at a time. But boy, 4-slice toaster, if you're making dinner for 4 people, everybody gets a piece of toast, right? Or making breakfast or whatever, and you just have to do it once. It's so handy, right? So people are getting loans and borrowing money to buy things they don't need. This mass consumerism is going to really fire up the economy, you know, because people are spending all this money and buying all these things. And so the factories are going to make more blenders and make more toasters and make more of these things. But the reality is that everybody was buying all of this on credit. So if they lose their job, they're in trouble. Right? So we'll see this coming. But the biggest thing that people were buying on credit or installment buying in this time period was the automobile. Right? This idea of the car became so important and such an important part of American society. And the automobile had existed before the 1920s, but Henry Ford puts it on the assembly line and the prices start coming down on the automobile. American people can afford to buy a car. Every day American people can afford to buy a car for the first time ever. And the United States, we're kind of weird about cars. You know, the United States is very a car crazy culture. You know, it used to be all the big cars, now it's all the different kinds of cars, but we've just always loved our cars, especially since the 1920s. By 1920, we were selling 5 million cars a year. By 1928, we had sold over 40 million cars. And if you think about it, the Model T in 1926 cost about $290, which sounds like nothing to us today, but you know, if you think about it, the employees at Ford made $5 a day, which was a good wage. People fought to get jobs at Ford because he paid them $5 a day. And it's $290 to buy one of those Model Ts. So you do the math at what percentage of their income it would be. And those are people with a good wage. But you could borrow money to buy that car. They all look the same. They're all black. They're all the simple model. You know, I don't know how people told them apart when they all parked them on the road together. We've got pictures of the Denton Square with Model Ts all wrapped around it. I don't know how they found their car, if they had different little fuzzy dice. I don't think they had fuzzy dice in the 1920s, but they figured it out. And the reality is that the car is going to change American culture because the car gives independence. You guys remember when you turned 16, right? Or you know, your friend turned 16. I'm a May birthday, so I was the last in my group of friends that, you know, got a car or got to drive a car. But my friend Chris Pickenpaw, Chris was an October baby. And so in fall of our sophomore year, she got her license, and it changed our world. Rather than walking all across town to go get a pizza after the football game or asking mom for a ride. We got to go in Chris's car. And her dad bought her a big old Cadillac, like a really old Cadillac. You know, I sat in the back seat and reached my feet out and couldn't reach the front seat. One of those Cadillacs, right? And she would drive and she'd bump over every curb and she'd do all that. And she charged us all gas money because the thing got negative 10 miles an hour. Of course, then we all found out that her dad was giving her gas money too. And we all got mad. But she was the only one with her license. So we went ahead and rode with her and we were happy to do it. But it gives freedom, right? Having that car gives you freedom. It gives you independence to, you know, make a little stop here or go where you want to go when you want to go. And it changes everything in 1920s America for society. It changes dating, right? You used to have to date and you'd sit on the front porch. Right? Usually you'd sit in the living room with mom and dad and grandma right there. But then if you were serious and maybe engaged, you'd get to sit on the front porch together. But with the car, you could say, we're going to go off on a picnic. Those cars had rumble seats, you know. There was a lot more going on in those cars than you would think. Right? So it was a lot of independence. It was a lot of change in society, a lot of young versus old drama going on there in the 1920s. It also causes some problems, right? The more cars are sold, the fewer people are riding on the trolleys. So it puts a lot of trolley businesses out of business. It helps organized crime, right? Because if you're going to be a criminal and you can have a getaway car instead of a getaway horse, you're going to, you know, it's going to be a little easier to have the crime. So the car is a big part of that consumer culture, and all the advertising and all those things are going to really nationalize the country. They're going to homogenize the country where everybody's listening to the same soap opera on the radio. Everybody's buying the same car. Everybody's buying the same clothes out of catalogs by the 1920s. And so it really, this consumerism and technology and advertisement really starts to make the United States look closer to what we look like today. You know, it really is the decade that is most familiar to us today when you looked at the past, whether it's the music that is played or the things that people are buying and driving and wearing. It really makes a big difference. All right, that's the first step.